Okay. You want me to start?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everybody. I wish we could be in person. For 10 years, we've had the privilege of being in person with faculty on this campus, and for several years, faculty that came from across North Carolina. And so we hope to be in person with you in the near future, but we're excited about this opportunity. You know, as you all have experienced, Zoom is terrible and exhausting, and it's wonderful. And sometimes it actually breeds more connectivity than otherwise. So we're going to try to make the best of this Zoom experience. And I know you all are weary of Zoom, as many are. You know, I want to just give you a little feedback and give you some insight into our office at Innovate Carolina before I introduce the Chancellor and then turn it over to Liz. We were started about 10 years ago to create an intentional culture of innovation and entrepreneurship so that we could accelerate the impact that we were having, especially addressing the grand challenges of our time, especially in North Carolina. And I know all of you work in so many different ways to make that a reality. So what is the tool set, mindset, and skill set that all of us need so that our research can find its way into translation for practical value? We do a lot of good work, and I think we can see in the context of today's world with COVID-19 and with the racial research and ideas and good intentions are not enough. It is that translation into action. And that's what we all stand for here at Innovate Carolina. Office is the Vice Chancellor's Office for Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development. Each one of those words has a very important reason to be in the title, but it's very long, so we go by Innovate Carolina. We have two segments into our office. One is the Office of Strategy, the Office of Innovate Carolina, and we cover the whole ecosystem. We make sure that Carolina is moving as a collective toward that goal of solving big challenges in the world. And we work with everybody on campus, and we sometimes run programs like this one. We support others, we help raise money, and then we collect data and we report on impact. And then we have a very strong communication team that tries to harness all of the great work that you're doing and tell those stories so the people around the globe understand what we stand for. I think the spotlight has just come on to us big time because of COVID-19 and the infectious disease. That work's been going on for 30 years. We know that. We've been licensing IP to Gilead and other companies and doing all of that hard work behind the scenes. And when something like this comes up, we're at the forefront and we're the leaders. And so it is that entrepreneurial mindset and skill set. If you prefer to call it an innovation one, mindset skill set, that's fine. The language doesn't matter to us. It is what you feel comfortable with. And it is taking ideas and putting them into purposeful action that really makes a difference at the root. And so, you know, we have a website and we have a lot of resources, and it doesn't really matter that you understand the resources that are available. You just need to be able to call Liz or Michelle or Patrick or anybody else that you meet in our office, and they'll guide you through because there are hundreds of resources on campus. It's kind of overwhelming. And I always tell people, don't worry about that. Just find your navigator. One person, they'll know, and they'll get you to the right people quicker than you trying to dig through it all. We're just so thrilled that you're with us today. And I want to say just a few more things before I tell you about an amazing entrepreneur, academic, faculty member, leader. So what we are calling this new series of online workshops is called Innovate Now. And so this isn't just these this series right now, but there's going to be ongoing workshops that we're providing. So just stay tuned, stay in the community, and you'll know about those things. Sometimes when we bring our faculty in for the first day, they think, I'm not quite sure why I'm here. My dean suggested that I go, and so I did. And so you may not even think of yourself in the terms of what we're talking about, of being an innovator or an entrepreneur as a faculty member. And that's fine. I think, the tools that you will learn in this workshop apply to everything that you do. So, whether you see yourself right now at it, just kind of take in the process and see what you can learn, because I promise you, people do really begin to understand why this is so important for every faculty member to have that capacity of the entrepreneurial mindset and skill set, because you're the ones that are driving the research and the innovation. It starts there and then it continues to go. So a lot of times people also assume that this is all about creating a startup. And that's actually the smallest part of the way that translation happens at Carolina. I always talk about the 80-20 rule. 80% is not going to be in a startup, or even 90%. So how else does it find its way? It can be a research initiative that ends up changing behavior, policy, rules, and practices. It can be advancing a technology, a new approach to teaching and curriculum, which we all are in the midst of that right now, and on and on. So, we don't want to get pigeonholed into that there's just this, even a not-for-profit. It's not necessary to create those to have lasting impact. And of course, as we said, we're in the midst of two major crises right now that need action for permanent change in the future. I think it's important, since we use the word innovation, to define it. And we've had a definition that we have been talking about for a long time. Innovation is not a synonym for creativity. Creativity is amazing. It's needed. It's inspiring in and of itself. And sometimes it's the beginning of the process. And if it doesn't continue to have lasting impact, then creativity is an end goal of itself, but certainly doesn't have the synonym for innovation. So we define innovation as something that's unique, valuable, as defined by who's consuming it, using it, and then successfully implemented. So that last part's the really hard and long process, sometimes painful, arduous journey that is nothing that's really worthwhile is easy at all. And so taking these ideas and getting them into change to behavior, it is a long process, and it takes a lot of courage and perseverance. So, we talk about the entrepreneurial mindset, and it's just a way of thinking and looking at things and saying, oh, here's a problem. I see it as an opportunity to find new and better actions. It's a way that entrepreneurs are good at convincing other people to come along with them, create their teams, get their investors, their mentors. Convention is a really important part. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of roadblocks. It takes a lot of perseverance. And the single one attribute of an entrepreneur through all the research literature as they've been studied for the last 50 years says one thing: you accept ambiguity and risk as part of the disruption process, but you try to mitigate risk. And there are going to be roadblocks, and you're going to have to persevere. So those are the characteristics, the mindset, and then the skill set is what you're going to really learn a lot about today. So I want to turn my attention to Kevin and embarrass him. So, just get ready, Kevin. I first met Kevin when I walked onto the campus, and I had a big fundraising group called the Innovation Circle, and we raised quite a bit of money early on. But we also set the agenda for a culture shift at Carolina to be this innovative university, to care society. And Kevin was the kind of shining star at the moment, and really we were focusing on his research in concussions at the time. And since then he's become dean and now chancellor, so we have a lot more to say. But kind of going back to him as a faculty entrepreneur, if you think back of what he did, and I know you all know Kevin's story because you have been a faculty member with him for a long time, but I just want to remind you a little bit. When he first started working in concussions, he had this idea, and his question was, how can we better understand and limit concussions in sports? Simple question, a lot of research going into this. And then he introduced a multifaceted baseline testing program for student athletes that includes cognitive and balance testing, because he wanted to know, all right, we need to know what's going on in their brains right now. and then have that as our baseline. And this approach has become the gold standard for concussion management of athletes before the season. And so then if anyone sustains an injury, that can be compared. And so Kevin was the director of the Matthew Geffeller Sport-Related Traumatic Brain Injury Research Center. And then that catapulted him through his work of organizing an institute, getting on the national scene, working with others that were noted researchers in this area. So all of a sudden, well, it doesn't seem like all of a sudden, but after all of that hard work, he became a top voice nationally. And then that allowed him to get to infuse his research into the NFL and to the Atlantic Coast Conference, NCAA, and on and on. And so through the research, converting that into practical use, he started really proselytizing what he was learning through research. So here's one example. In 2011, the NFL used data from Kevin's team and decided to move kickoffs up by 5 yards to the 35-yard line. This reduced the number of kickoff returns, which reduced the number of concussions on that play by 42%, 5 yards, and somebody's life. It's a remarkable story. And then the NCAA made a similar policy change, 50% reduction in concussions during kickoffs. So when the novice sees a football game and they want, why did they change that line? Well, who knows? Well, we know, and we know the results. And that one thing came out of his research. And if he didn't do anything else, $1 billion industry. And, it's been under a lot of criticism for its callousness toward the health. But he got their attention. And he got them to change rules, and he saved lives that way. And, so we could just say he's a researcher in neuroscience who studies concussions. But he didn't end there. He just changed so many lives. So I'm going to say just 2 more things, then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. But he took that same entrepreneurial mindset and skill set, and he applied it as dean. So now he's got 17,000 undergrads, 2,400 grads, 70 departments, on and on and on. And he set out vision first. And I know a lot of you are probably in the college, so you probably were part of that with him. But he didn't just accept what was. He actually went in deep under and started doing the strategy, setting goals, challenging people, looking at how can we be better? Because that's the fundamental question of this whole innovation, isn't it? Is if you see something that you don't like, you don't just complain and talk about it. You set to work, and you have to be really smart and strategic. And that's really the hallmark of Kevin. We've seen him as he's emerged as our chancellor in the midst of, I don't know who could throw more at you. We had still silent Sam issues when you came in, thank you. And then on and on. And so COVID, and then race relations again. So Kevin, thank you. Thank you for taking your valuable time to be with the faculty today. We can't thank you enough for your servant leadership and all you've done to help every one of us do our jobs as best we can. So thank you, Kevin. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Judith. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, I want to welcome everyone to today's workshop and event. I want to thank Judith for a very kind introduction, and but also for really taking Innovate Carolina, and I know you have an incredible team there, but taking it to the next level. And we really, if you think about how far we've come in a relatively short period of time with regard to innovation and entrepreneurship, so much of that, Judith, has been because of your leadership. So we're grateful. And I want to also thank Liz Chen from the Gillings School of Global Public Health. I know you're going to lead a lot of the discussion today, and really great to have you there and sharing your experiences. And I also want to thank all of you, the participants today, for saying yes to an invitation, because these are, we try to keep this group relatively small each year, but many of you are already engaged and involved in some way with innovation, and I hope that you'll find a way today through this, to really up your game, I guess, as I found it to be so helpful years ago when I did this. And I think we have to find ways to overcome those roadblocks that Judith talked about and find the opportunities that maybe we hadn't realized were out there for us. And so thanks for you being here. Carolina does, as Judith just showcased, we have an extraordinary record of innovation. And I think it's just been showcased over the past 2 or 3 months in response to COVID-19 across the university. We were able to transition to remote learning in just under 10 days, our faculty. So in many ways, so many of you innovation to be able to do that and to know that you're still delivering quality instruction. Our Beam maker spaces and the medical students that teamed up to very quickly in a matter of days produce face shields for the healthcare workers over at UNC Healthcare and UNC hospitals. Dr. Barrick, Ralph Barrick, you've seen him and his researchers all over the news leading the way in COVID-19 research, discovering new ways to use remdesivir, which is Judith mentioned Gilead. This is a partnership that research team had with Gilead Pharmaceuticals to being used for other treating other conditions, could be used for treating coronavirus in serious cases. The School of Government, the impacts of the pandemic, and there's so many other examples of how Carolina has really stepped up. You may have seen, it's probably been 7 weeks ago now, 7 or 8 weeks ago, that Microsoft Academia ranked Carolina the third institution, but the first university in the country that's making an impact through its research on COVID-19. We were ranked third among institutions, only behind the CDC and the NIH. And so I think speaks volumes to the many ways in which we've been showcasing that innovation and making a difference in the world. So it isn't by accident. I think so much of this happens through collaboration. I know my own research that Judith shared a bit about would never have reached the type of impact that it has if it weren't for this culture of collaboration that we have at Carolina. Our ability to fulfill our mission, challenges of our time, really requires this culture of collaboration where we can view problems and challenges through different lenses and bring together a research team that can really advance our understanding and knowledge, not only about the new discovery, but the actual application of it and the way that society is going to use it. I've always said that's one thing we do better than anybody, bringing together the medical sciences with the humanities, with the social sciences and natural sciences to really create this important culture that then allows the dissemination of information to be used or to be valued and utilized by society. So you're doing your part to strengthen Carolina's culture of innovation just by taking part in this. And I know that what you learn here that you'll take back to your own departments, your research centers. It'll be, for some of you, maybe the first step toward a new way of thinking. And my advice is to, don't we talk about just this unique culture of collaboration that we have here, and encourage you to reach out across the university, seek out new colleagues to try to take on these grand challenges in a team-based approach. And I think you're going to hear a lot about that through this workshop. So by exploring these ideas and discovering solutions together, I think we can really define what it means to be the leading global public research university in the nation, which we often talk about. I think we are leading the way in so many areas, and innovation, entrepreneurship certainly are two of those. So thanks again for participating today and for all that you do for Carolina. And I hope everybody's staying safe, families are well, and we do look forward to getting everybody back to campus safely. We started to ramp up our research, on-campus research operations over the past week, and the fall semester in August. So Thanks so much for allowing me to jump in for a while today. And Judith, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good day.
All right.
So I appreciate that. And I just want to tell you a little bit about our team. I mentioned Innovate Carolina. Many people are behind working on this initiative and this workshop. And so some of them are online here with you now, and you can see Michelle and Cheryl and Kimmy, and I'm going to introduce Liz in a second, but others are on or will be on later. But we have an incredible team of people, and everybody that meets our team, from our interns who I still hear from, some are in China, some are all over the world, they always talk about the way this team works together in this respect, passion, dedication. So Michelle Bolas is the Associate Vice Chancellor. Like COVID-19, 40,000 face masks and all that stuff. Well, Michelle was the point person running all of the PPE initiatives between the hospital and us and the governor's office. She would never tell you that, which is nice to have such a talented person and humble. So anyway, I want to just thank them all for all the hard work they've done. And then I want to introduce Liz. So you probably know Liz. I mean, she's been around quite a while in our seminars and different things, but she's the same kind of person that Kevin is. She has this entrepreneurial mindset, skill set, and she's done so many things. And she became really enamored with, of course, community-based participatory research is at the heart of everything, engagement, and then human-centered design. And so she was so interested in that she went to IDEO, which is a big name in this area it's in Stanford and Silicon Valley. It's been a part of the university at Stanford and its design school. And so she educated herself there. And then, of course, she has done so many other things. She created a nonprofit called My Health Ed in 2016. And the purpose of that is to use human-centered design to improve the health and well-being of youth of every identity. Liz and her co-founders applied a human-centered design approach to develop and launch Real Talk, their award-winning sex ed through storytelling app for teens 13 to 15 in 2017. And today, Real Talk has provided comprehensive sex education to thousands of teens across the US and in more than 100 countries. She was named as the Forbes 30 Under 30 Social Entrepreneur list in 2018. She earned her PhD in. See the timeline there, right? She's finishing her doctoral degree while she's doing all this other stuff. Pretty impressive. And she's in the Department of Health Behavior at UNC School of Global Public Health. And as you could tell, her research is design thinking, adolescent health, mobile health, rural health, and education. She was a Teach for America alumni, which I didn't know till today. I don't know why I didn't know that. And you taught biology and chemistry at Eastern North Carolina. So that was it's pretty great to have Liz as a member of the Innovate Carolina team. And she's our human-centered design expert. And what a privilege to work with you, Liz. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks for the intro, Judith. Glad, that you found out that I'm a Teach for America alum. That's actually what brought me to North Carolina back in 2010. And so I'm going to advance the slides, and I know that the lawn is being mowed outside my home right now, and so if we are having any audio issues, just put it in the chat and I will adjust. And so I'm going to go first and give a brief overview of both the Innovate Now series that's faculty facing, and then also talk through the objectives for today. Like Judith mentioned, I earned my MPH and PhD here at UNC in the School of Public Health. I'm on faculty in health behavior, but I also spend a lot of my time as design thinking lead for Innovate Carolina. In that role, I spend the majority of my efforts working with faculty, staff, and students in training them in human-centered design or design thinking methods, and then working alongside them to integrate these methods into their teaching, research, and practice. And so as a reminder, the Innovate Now series is happening in the next couple of weeks and will continue in the next couple of months. However, for those of you who were nominated by your deans to participate in the Chancellor's Faculty Innovation Workshop, you will have that experience in the fall. So we are going to be planning that, and you will receive further communications about that experience. And so for the workshop series that we have planned for you all, our hope is that you will be able to learn more about design thinking methods and mindsets. We will foster community among faculty across campus who you might not otherwise get to know. And then also connect faculty with innovation and entrepreneurship experts and resources here at UNC, specifically here in our Innovate Carolina world. And so as a reminder, Innovate Carolina does have extensive breadth and depth with regards to resources for both innovation and entrepreneurship. And we will work with faculty and have worked with faculty to create customized plans for how to build capacity among you and your team so that you can succeed and thrive in this environment. And if you haven't already gone and reviewed the bios that were included in the info email prior to today, we are offering expert office hours in the next 2 weeks. And so there is a Google Sheet available for you to sign up for them. And specifically for today, we are really hoping that the workshop emphasizes the importance of designing intentional teams that really do support creativity. We are offering some concrete strategies for forming and managing virtual teams that we'll expose you to today, and then hope that you take these slides and resources back to your own teams to build on them. And then lastly, it's a time for us to be reflective and vulnerable as we try new things. And so we're hoping that today's workshop will also give you some moments to facilitate some individual reflection so that each of us can continue to learn and grow. And I put this TED Talk icon here just to remind us that for those of you who were able to watch Linda Hill's TED Talk prior to today, there are some very intentional processes that teams who are creative follow. And in addition to having those processes, many of these teams have really cohesive structures in place for how their teams operate and have been really intentionally designed. And so this is our attempt to make sure that you all at this moment, especially while we're social distancing, have more tools to be able to design and manage teams that are really set up for creativity. So for the rest of the session that will end promptly at 1 p.m., we are going to focus on first designing teams and then managing teams, and we have some guiding questions. So first, how might we design a diverse team? Followed by how might we invite others to be on our teams? And then for the managing part, how might we understand how different team members operate, as well as how might our team operate? I'm going to start by going through some new content. These slides are already available on the Sakai site in both PowerPoint and PDF format. For those of you who have questions as we go through slides, feel free to type into the chat and I will respond as best I can. And then there are activities every couple of slides. And so for those of you who have pen and pencil ready, great. If you have a Word doc open on your computer that you can type in, that will also be helpful. So designing teams. How might we design a diverse team? So studies have shown that diverse teams produce better outcomes and are more innovative. And so I've cited some seminal work here, but there are different definitions for what better outcomes are and more innovation. In particular, I think it's really important that we highlight that the timeline for research turning into integrated practice is shortened for teams that are more diverse. And typically in these studies, when these researchers are defining what they are calling diverse teams, race, ethnicity, and gender are the two factors that are most often cited. And so wanting to get some audience participation, it would be great if each of you could think through one or two other factors that you might contribute or might deem that contributes to our diverse team. And if you could type them into the chat, I will share some of them. Age. level of training, diverse disciplines, strengths and weaknesses, viewpoints, country of origin, disabilities, location, spirituality, life experiences. Lovely. So when we look at more of the literature, some of the more common ways that we define diverse teams and diverse team members are things that we can typically find on a CV. And so field of study, I'm in health behavior. If I add an epidemiologist and a biostatistician onto my team, that's a way to make it more diverse. With regards to methods, so if I'm trained in one set of methods and I'm looking for something different, adding experts in different quantitative, qualitative methods might be another way to get more diverse. And then in institutions. And so we are here at UNC. If we add folks from Duke, Elon, NC State, we can up our diversity. Some less common factors that have been reflected in the group chat here that can't always be figured out via looking at somebody's CV include experiences, values and goals, opinions, and strengths. And so experiences meaning it's for work that I do in school-based settings right now, I find that having been a classroom teacher is really valuable, even though I might be a newer faculty member on some of these projects. And so being able to say that I know how different school leaders make decisions, or I know how to design lessons for K-12 settings, and that might translate to how we would translate content in higher ed settings now amidst COVID, is helpful. Values and goals, this doesn't usually come up prior to designing or creating teams, but maybe we should think about that some more. And there's evidence there that it's important for us to think through what people want generally in their professional careers and in life, because those different perspectives can add a lot. Right now, with the opening conversations for North Carolina amidst COVID, we know that there might be some people whose values and goals are really focused on the epidemiology and the spread of disease and community transmission. And so that's their training. Their goal is to make sure that we are doing things in the safest way possible. We also have people who are really concerned about the economy. And so their training and their perspectives might lead to different options and different conversations. And if we aren't explicit about creating a team where we are very, very intentionally bringing different people with different values and goals together and knowing that up front, we might be missing some really important different perspectives. Similar with opinions, it's very easy for us to, as we're creating teams, think through who we already know, we work well with, have some similar opinions, and are aligned with for X, Y, and Z. And that's great, maybe for efficiency. However, again, challenging us all to think through what are we missing if we aren't including those different voices. And then somebody did include strengths and weaknesses. And so there are many ways that we assemble teams. One way for us to think through moving forward is we now know, especially with Zoom and being virtual and having to juggle personal lives at home more so maybe than when we would have in this pre-COVID life, that time is precious. And so it's really important for us to start strategically assigning tasks and building teams that are made to solve certain problems. And so in addition to this particular set of factors, we know that there's many, many more. And so encourage you and your teams to think through how you actually define diversity, and then whether and how you hold yourself accountable to making sure that you are seeing these different kinds of factors. And then last thing to say on this slide, it's really hard to go through and always be able to control, especially if you are not the one creating the team, how to go through and encourage more diversity in teams. And so the tool on the next slide is one effort for us to be able to make it more visual so that each of you has a tangible next step that you can use to generate conversation. And so we're going to go through a brief reflection activity that, again, you can do either on pen or paper or through jotting things down on a Word doc. But we want you to think through a team that you have either put together, or if you haven't put together a team recently, think about a team that you're explicitly part of. And I'm going to give you all 2 to 3 minutes to just jot down the responses for this particular graphic organizer. And so, how diverse is your team? List out the number of people that you have total on your team, and then how many team members you would consider to be diverse because of these factors, knowing that this list is not exhaustive, but just wanting you to just take inventory at this time for how diverse one of your teams might be. And so again, I'll put 2 minutes on my own timer and then ask you to individually reflect before we come back whole group. Thirty more seconds. All right, so at this point, it would be great to hear from a few folks about how easy or hard it was to complete this activity. And so we're going to try having folks unmute themselves and volunteer answers. And if that doesn't work, we might go to some sort of hand raising versus in Zoom and then me calling. But let's see if this works first.
So I'll jump out there for you guys.
Hi, Todd.
Hey, how is everyone? So I'm working with a team of myself and some students and a couple other faculty members. And so kind of working across the different categories you have, Liz, honestly, because I've had members and I've also kind of vetted these students because I am the director of the program they applied to, like I know them well. And so for me, because I had that familiarity, I was able to mosey through this pretty quickly. But I was hitting it at the high level, and I think that was just time. But I really think it could have gotten more nuanced. And like one of the areas that I thought was really interesting to me was like experience. And I like initially broke it down to years of experience, but then I started thinking about, well, I have experience similar to you in the classroom. I was a high school English teacher, is how I started my career. But then I'm like, I also have experience in higher ed, but now I have students who are coming in who are like the CIOs of some charter schools or who are exemplary elementary school teachers. And then I have also faculty members who I'm not sure have stepped in a K-12 classroom, you know? And so the experiences, I think you can really hammer it down on that one. So that was the one that I, if I had more time, I'd probably go down that rabbit hole and really think that through a little more.
Thanks, Todd. And I think that it's great for each of us to also start thinking about how we would get to know people's experiences sooner so that we have that information going into team formation. And for those of us who are part of programs who are getting ready to onboard new cohorts of students in a way that might be more virtual than typical, I think these are things that we will all continue to think about. Thanks. Maybe one more comment or reflection about how easy or hard this was, or any other reactions to this?
So I can go. I can't figure out how to raise my hand with two screens, but the elephant in the room for the team that I created about a year ago when I came back to Carolina, as I think I was able to add more variation, but I had to come up with a team based on what a grant application wanted: previous funding, who I could afford, prior working relationships. But if I really dig, I can think of that they are a different perspective. And maybe I need to leverage that a little more. But I had the hardest time values and goals. I don't know that I've ever asked. I can assume what their values and goals are, and you know, I have a variation of everything. But I also realized these are Caucasian, about the same age, and that you know, there's some strengths, and then there's some that by necessity of how to put them together. But there might be areas just based on these questions that have got me thinking more.
Thanks, Leslie. And then to your point, like, we all make assumptions. And I think that in an office setting where we are all physically together and might be able to pop by somebody's office and then be able to hear what they did this weekend and hear their views on XYZ so we can infer these values and goals, it's going to be much harder as we are separate and aren't able to have those informal conversations. And so as we move forward, I do think it's worth us thinking about how we, especially for teams that are meant to last for multi-week, multi-month, multi-year projects, how we start to understand each other's experiences, values, and goals and opinions early, even in the stage of team formation. All right, we're going to move on, but I thank you all for your participation. All right, so again, in an age where we are socially distant, it's really important for us to start to think through how we intentionally invite others to be part of our teams. And so it's very easy just to email somebody to volunteer them that they're going to be part of this team because of their specific role. We know from research, though, that successful teams have a unified team purpose, and they have a very clear understanding of their own individual purpose and how it connects to that team purpose. And so now that many of us are working remotely, we might need to work a little extra hard to make sure that we are explicitly connecting the dots. And so going through some of the Harvard Business Review articles, trying to generate a list of best practices, how might we invite others to be on our teams? Ask, don't tell. So whenever possible, ask instead of telling, even though it might be required in some level. Do your best in situations where you can to ask people to opt in, because that choice is really important, and that sense of autonomy. Send information about the project ahead of asking for a decision. So giving people enough processing time, especially now that we are virtual, so that they can think about the project some more, maybe come up with their own questions before they engage in a conversation where you expect their answer. Here are the next two, which are really, really important. be specific about why you're asking this person to join this project. So don't assume that they know because of their expertise or their skill set or their experiences that they already know that they're being asked for this project for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then again, each of us likes to know ahead of time what we will get out of something. And so also being really specific up front about what skills or opportunities they're going to gain from being part of this team. And then this last piece is team building, but for those of us who do manage, really important to start generating these conversations early, asking up front what people need to be successful on this particular project. And some of these might be ways that you already operate, but in a world where we are very, very remote, it's really important, especially about the why or the skills and opportunities, that we aren't assuming that these folks know why we're asking them to be on the team and assuming that they know what or how they'll benefit from being part of this. And so the next short activity will ask you to craft an effective team invitation. And so I want you to think about someone that you want to collaborate with newly, or someone that, or if you already work with somebody, that's totally fine for you to think about an existing project. So this slide offers some suggested language, and again, we want you to make it authentic to you, but wanted to at least provide some draft language for those of you who might never have put this in a formal email to send out. I'm starting a new team to blank. Really clear purpose as much as you can, knowing that things evolve, and I want you to consider being part of it. I think that you'd be a great fit for this because, and insert their unique contribution from your perspective. And I'm confident that you will gain blank while on the project. I'm also interested in learning about what you would need to be successful on this team and project. When do you have availability to discuss further? Again, hoping that you send this invitation with information and asking for a further conversation. And so again, I'm going to spend 2 minutes giving you all some individual reflection time to put together a version of prose. And then I will ask 2 to 3 of you to share out what you've written so that we can have some more examples of what this might look like. I will time 2 minutes starting now. All right, another 10 seconds to wrap up. And then Maureen, to your comment, doesn't the last sentence assume they say yes, and is it directive? This brings up power relationships on the team. I hope we talk about that. And so yes, so this language, if you would like to change it, I think that it could be less directive. And so I'm not sure if you're referring to the second to last sentence or the last sentence, but can be changed so that it's more of a question without the assumption that they're going to say yes. And yes, we know that because of the roles that we play at these in our institutions, faculty to faculty, senior faculty to junior faculty, faculty to student, faculty to something else, it's really tough. And this is probably not this exact email. You might not want to copy and paste it for all of these people. But I think that it's worth taking this template and then thinking through for the different teams that you're a part of and different types of relationships that you will be asking people to join your team, how you might want to tweak it. Natalia, I think it's hard to explain what they will gain when you are a junior researcher and you need them more than what they need you. So if you are a junior researcher asking a senior researcher, it might be harder. I still think that there are some benefits, whether it's publication, further grant opportunities, expanding their network, that there are some additional ways that you could list. But I also think that the earlier comment about asking senior faculty or asking those or anyone what specific skills they want to gain is helpful. So you could insert, these are the things that I think you will gain. Would like to learn more if there's others here that I have not mentioned that you would like to gain. Leslie, the hardest part was the last fill in the blank, what they would gain. I said they could be in early on a cutting edge intervention. Yes, so Leslie, there might be some very tangible gains like publications, grant applications, X, Y, and Z, but there are some of these less tangible things like explore a new topic or be part of a team that is going to try something different that hasn't been done before. And so again, we all have different areas of research and projects. And so I encourage you to make some version of this your own so that you can, as you invite people to conversations, have some sort of place where you've explicitly written down your thinking and then invite other people to continue to share theirs. Okay, for the sake of time, we're going to keep going. And again, knowing that a lot of this content, this is an initial primer and the first step in setting up the following faculty workshops in the Innovate Now series. We will also continue to touch upon these in more depth in the fall faculty innovation workshop. But these were the most important things that we wanted to elevate to now, instead of waiting to the faculty fall or the innovation workshop this fall. And then the last question, Matt, how long is the usual conversation regarding the potential team member? What elements should we include in that conversation? And so for the typical conversation, it's great if you give the information up front so that they've had time to process, so that the actual conversation is very focused and probably can be done pretty quickly. And so in that element, I would make sure that or in that conversation, I would make sure that you ask them if they have any questions and concerns, if there's any skills or opportunities that they want to gain that were left out, generate conversation about what they would need if they wanted to join this team, and then any next steps in terms of logistics timeline that you might need to communicate. But I really think that this could be a 15-minute conversation if you've done your part in being explicit about what the project is up front and given them time to process and come up with questions ahead of time. Okay, managing teams. So you've thought about the diversity of your team and how to ask people to be on your teams, and now you have some teams that you're a part of and may need to lead and manage. And so really important for us to start to think through how we understand how team members operate. All too often, we dive into the work without taking time to understand how individual team members operate or what they need to feel supported. So for creative collaborations to work, teams need to open conversation about how team members operate early. And one way to gather this information and generate discussion is to ask team members to share how they operate visually. And so I'm sure many of us have been on teams before, and sometimes the tension and the friction that happens is because we might not be all on the same page with the end goal that we're striving towards. A lot of the time, though, it is friction and tension because we might not understand what other people expect of us, or we have different working styles and preferences. And without having conversations up front and continuously about all of those things and how they might change, you lose out on an opportunity to get to know your teammates better and then setting yourself up for success later. And all of these things are in flux. So my preferences and how I was working and operating before we were socially distancing, so in January, February, are actually quite different from how I'm operating right now. And so again, we emphasize that even if you've done a version of this exercise before, now that we are virtual, it's really important that we take stock and start to do this again and then often. And so for this next quick activity, which I hope you take a version back to your own teams, is a how we operate tracker. And so I'm going to share the next screen and want you to think about how you would place yourself on the following spectrums, and think about how you operate and not how you'd like to operate. And so I've seen in activities like this where people really do, like, I know them well, I've worked with them really well, and I notice that they put what they are striving for, but not what actually happens. And it's really hard for you to have honest conversations and make everyone aware of how you operate when you aren't being honest and vulnerable with yourself and sharing how you really operate. And so for this next one, I will put my own stickies up, but it's really easy for you to create some sort of PowerPoint slide or Google slide or handout and then have people fill it out individually and then share. And you can change what you have at the ends of the different spectrums. But for this version, we have introvert versus extrovert, likes to work ahead of deadlines, likes to work right up to the deadlines, early bird versus night owl, ideator and executor, knowing that there's a whole lot of nuance in between. And so for my personal sticky notes, if we were doing this virtually, here's where I would put myself. And I've had to think through, like, I would like to claim that I'm an earlier bird than this post-it reflects, but that is probably where my teammates would put me also. I would love to be able to say that I like to work ahead of deadlines all the way on the left, but I'm somewhere here. So again, I'm going to give you each another 2 minutes, and it would be great if you could think about where you would place yourself on this activity. And then if you finish that, to offer up additional things that you would put at the ends of different spectrums that we might be able to share with each other that you would find helpful. And so again, 2 minutes to fill out virtually where you think you would be, and then to think through any additional categories that you would want to find out for team members of your own.
Good morning, Mom.
Another 30 seconds. All right, coming back and then drawing people's attention to the chat. And so some suggestions for other things that we might put on a spectrum like this: comfort working in teams, level of commitment, buy-in, or interest for a specific project, macro versus micro level thinker, or so a system level versus a individual level thinker. I see feedback and communication. So thinking through how you might put that into like a spectrum where there's a dichotomy, but I think it's important to either and through this activity or a different activity to really understand how people prefer to give and get feedback and to give and receive communication. Delegation versus control. Shannon, how to word in a nice manner? Not sure currently, but we can think about that. Again, preferred mode of communication, tolerance for stress, leader or follower, current bandwidth or time commitment based on workload. Matt, when you say response to feedback, is that a timeliness or is that qualitative?
Well, it's more along the lines of, you know, are individuals, you know, I guess some people are relatively rigid and others are more flexible. And so I guess that's probably a better way of putting it.
Helpful. Listener versus talker, organized versus unorganized, work on projects alone or all together, perfectionist, flexible versus rigid. Yeah, so, and then some of these like the flexible versus rigid, there's some here that I think would be harder for people to own and be honest and vulnerable with than others. And so as a group, we might need to think through how to put it on a spectrum like this, but then also think about, for those of us who are, like, maybe one of you introduces this activity for your next team meeting, how we as leaders might need to model vulnerability in showing what we would like to be at, but know that we're not. And so as we think about how to adapt this activity for our own team needs, I would also encourage us to think through how you will be vulnerable and be authentic to your team, so that hopefully when they get to that question about organized versus unorganized, you don't just have everybody posting in that hyper organized category.
Liz, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So is it possible to sort of do this in a stepwise fashion such that, you know, you get the baseline information that's really important to figure out, you know, who can be, have certain duties, I guess, on the team. And then based on those duties, sort of then figure out maybe some of those more vulnerable questions. Because I think it tends to get people at least engaged in doing this type of activity before you ask them whether they're, you know, a micromanager like myself over, you know, somebody who can just come in and do whatever anybody asks.
Yeah, Shannon, I think it's great if you did it in steps, just to like introduce the type of activity first with ones that are like the ones here. And then as your team gets to be more comfortable with each other, for you to then introduce some of the ones that people have an initial reaction to or wanting to maybe not share their actual answer for. And so I also think that there are ways to collect some of this information, especially about how people like to give and receive feedback and how people like to communicate, that might not be like the best in a spectrum activity. And so I've seen surveys that have come out where people just fill them out knowing that their results are going to be shared with the rest of their teammates. So that might be better than forcing people into a dichotomy. Maureen wrote, work fits situation versus situation needs to fit to work. Maureen, can you say more?
Yeah, I was trying to think, and it's implied in a number of these other situations, but especially in times of change like we're dealing with now, there are certain folks who say, well, I can do this type of work, but I've got kids at home, so, you know, I can't dedicate up to a 5-hour, you know, meeting online, but I can still do the work. Versus, I think can be some conversations where if you want to be part of the team, your background situation has to fit what the team needs. So I think that becomes one of those real sort of conversations about, I'd like to be on the team, but this is my situation, and so I have to work within this situation, versus folks who might have the ability to say, if you, or say, if you want to be on this team, because of the nature of the work or the nature of the team, it's got this structure. And so we welcome you to join the team, but you'll have to fit your situation to the team. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for further expanding on that. And then along those same lines, we're in a time where everything is changing constantly. And so as you complete activities like this, remind your teams, remind yourself that your answers will likely change. Like if my husband asked me to do this for like the way that I interact with him in my personal life and how I manage tasks, there would be different sticky notes placed in different places than for my work projects. And similarly, before COVID, some of these might have changed a little bit, and then now. And so remembering that just because somebody puts this once at the beginning of a team doesn't mean that this is how they will be forever. And so using tools like this to generate conversations that are normalized over time about how we work is really, really helpful. Okay, going to move on. Yes.
Could I respond just really quickly to Catherine's question?
Yes.
And I did like the idea of the word priorities. The only thing is that when you think about working, sometimes the priorities are not under your control. They're due to external circumstances. So a project may be very high priority, but you may have a circumstance that you simply can't walk away from. And so to me, it always puts someone in a difficult position in those terms if they're willing to try to work something out. But I'll stop there, Liz, because I know you've got to keep on track. But it's worth a longer term conversation about working with teams.
Yes, and we're also hoping that, I know Zoom is difficult and we also have only an hour and a half every session, but it's really nice that some of you are chatting, some of you are unmuting yourself, that we really do hope that you start to build relationships with faculty who you've never met before. So if some of you want to go offline and start to create a more comprehensive set of spectrums that maybe a larger group could then use as a template, that would be a great outcome. But wanting to encourage you all to reach out and connect with people that you are meeting and engaging with in this setting offline as well. Okay, so to transition, the last piece for today is how might our teams operate? So great, we've figured out how individuals work and operate. We've been vulnerable, we've been honest, and we're doing it often. We still need to explicitly figure out how we're actually going to work, and having these conversations again up front leads to more efficient and effective teams. And we recommend writing down your team norms, your commitments, your expectations, so that you can reference them when they're not being upheld. And this might not be something that you go to for teams that are, or smaller teams or teams that are constantly changing, but for those multi-month, multi-year projects, we do really encourage that you do some of this work up front so that everyone's on the same page, you understand the expectations of you and of the group, and then if something isn't going the way as expected, then you have something to then reference and continue to reference throughout your project, just so that you can all stay on the same page. And so when tensions arise, you're not looking for a way to react because you've proactively had these discussions up front. And so some of the things that we encourage team leads to think about is meeting norms, communication norms, decision-making, conflict management, project management, and feedback norms. So I saw communication and feedback come up on the activity before. For meeting norms, some things like starting and ending meetings. When we say we start at 10 a.m., are we actually starting at 10 a.m.? With regards to a meeting agendas and meeting rules, so are we going to have a set agenda every time? How do people populate agenda items? And then as we discuss, are there any ground rules for those discussions in those meetings? With regards to communication norms, what's the expectation for responding to communications, whether it's phone calls or emails? Are we expecting that everybody responds same day? Everyone responds within 72 hours? It doesn't always have to be about response time, but just mode of communication as well. Like, we are only going to communicate via Microsoft Teams or emails the way we're going to do it. But having these conversations up front can be helpful. With regards to decision making, which decisions get made by whom? And so is it everyone gets to make every decision, or are there certain decisions that team leads, a group of 3 make, and then other people get to provide input on? But there's all these configurations that can be considered, and tensions do arise when decision-making processes are not clear. Similarly, for conflict management, if 2 folks in the group are really having a hard time completing a project together, who is responsible for helping them navigate that? If anyone. Project management, who is going to be making sure that we are completing the tasks that we say that we're going to? Are we going to use some sort of software to manage this? If we are late on something, what are the repercussions, if any? And then lastly, for feedback norms, are we going to have like a very formal way where we give written feedback every so often? Can we schedule meetings with team leads to discuss X, Y, and Z whenever we feel like it? So I'm trying to give some examples for each of these things, but know that it's a lot, especially if this is something that's new to you. And so over the next couple of weeks, we'll populate more examples onto the Sakai site so that you have some written documents that you can look at yourself and then adapt. But the research does show that teams that can gel around explicitly defining how they'll operate, knowing that it might change, like their document might change, but understanding what their role is, how they'll operate, and expecting that other people do the same is really helpful. And so the next activity, which will round out activities for today, is for you all to go to pollev.com/LizCChen. You can do this on your phone or on the website, and to just rank these ones in terms of importance to you. And so if you could only, like, if you had to define which of these is most important to least important, You will just have to click the up arrows and down arrows just to make them more important or less important in the ranked list. And then I'd like to share them with everybody else so that we can see what you came up with. So I'm going to switch from slides to the Poll Everywhere site. All right, so it looks like many of you have contributed to this. And so here's the current set of trends, knowing that it might continue to change as folks complete it either on their smartphones or on their browsers on their computers. But it looks like communication norms and decision-making seem to be at the top. And then feedback norms and meeting norms tend to be at the bottom for right now. And so as we move forward, we will continue to hit on these in the faculty innovation workshop in the fall, but we will prioritize sharing resources about communication norms and decision-making norms because those seem to be of most interest to you all, but we'll make sure that resources on all 6 will be shared. And for those of you who are able to do the poll everywhere on your phones and have already submitted, are there any thoughts or reactions to this topic or this poll?
Well, I have also, who says we have to choose? What if I think all 6 are number 1?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Or yeah, there might be other things that need to be on this list that are missing right now. And so happy to, if others feel like there's something that should be here that hasn't been surfaced yet, happy to hear those. Kate raised the point that communication is fundamental to being able to do all the others.
I think risk and mitigation is also an important one.
Yeah, can you say more?
Sure. Whenever you're having a long project, there are places where you have multiple risks that can be there, and you need to figure out early on how you're going to mitigate those type of risks so that you anticipate and put down saying that these are the type of risks that we are planning to work on. If they come in, we are going to do this type of thing. For example, if you're writing a proposal to NSF, they automatically ask if it is a large project, what happens if the PI moves away? How do you deal with it? That type of thing.
Yeah, and then also probably for projects that this is related to, like your process of determining risk is probably helpful. Okay, so I am going to go back to sharing my screen of slides. Okay, so as a reminder, we will start to populate more examples of these types of written documents so that each of you has access to a bank so you can model documents of your own off of them. And at this point, we've reached the part where we're announcements and reminders before we open it up for Q&A. And so our next workshop will be on Wednesday of this week, again at the same time slot, so from 11:30 to 1. Before Wednesday, we do ask that each of you learn and reflect on the 18 key cognitive biases that impact creativity and innovation. Instructions were included in the agenda that was emailed out on Friday for today's session. They're also on the Sakai site under forums, and then will be emailed out today. We expect that it will take you between 15 and 30 minutes to read the handout and reflect, but really encourage you to do it. And then you will also be receiving an email with a feedback survey after today's workshop, and ask that you complete it by 11 a.m. on Wednesday. We will be going through that feedback so that we can see how we might be able to improve this experience for the next couple of workshops. And then last thing, in that initial email that each of you received from me, there was the invitation to sign up for office hours with Innovate Carolina experts in the next 2 weeks. And so we encourage you to read the PDF document that previewed each of the different experts and what they can offer, and then sign up for office hours, and our team members will confirm with Zoom invites and calendar invites. And at this point, we will open it up for questions. And so if you have questions or reactions based on any of the content today, it would be great for you to either unmute yourself and share, or continue to type into the chat, and I will do my best to respond that way.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were talking about we were ranking those individuals, when I was talking about communication, the way I interpreted this, and I think this goes to sort of, when we ask questions of people, we all tend to interpret it slightly differently, is that when you're talking about communication, your communication preference, not whether or not whether or not you liked good communication or bad communication, but really what that preference was. Was that what you were asking, or?
Typically, when we reference communication, it's, how do you like to send and receive communications? And so a lot of it's mode. So is it, you would primarily like to be contacted by email or phone, or it's really helpful when folks are like, I would like you to try email first, but if you haven't heard from me in 48 hours, please text me. And so it's more about, typically it's about the mode of communication that you prefer, and then also the timeliness.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and then you might have interpreted something else, which is also really important to how you operate with your teams. And so I don't want to limit it either to only those, but those were the examples I was referencing. Other questions or reactions? All right, then I will ask a question. Are there, how might you use one of these types of activities with a team that you're a part of or are starting?
I think this is Maureen Berner. I think one of the takeaways that I will have from today is I haven't formed a team yet, but it will be really important for me to be thoughtful about what I ultimately want to accomplish and who I need to have at the table to get that done. So it's making me think a little bit broader about an intentional.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing.
Hi, Liz. This is Jeff Middlestead. The Center for Sustainable Enterprise in the Business School is going to start creating teams of external stakeholders around sustainability issues. So it's really helpful because with those going across industries and companies and topic areas, there will be a lot of people with a lot of different ways that they work best. So I think this is really helpful for us for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'd really, and this is Maureen again, I'd encourage folks to also think about, when you think about what it takes to make it happen, the opening up of this session talked in part about translating what we do into action, products, change. And so to me, there's a real question about including people on the team that will be critical to that translation, not just critical to sort of the short-term solution or innovation, but the long-term gain about, well, how do we make sure that this has an impact? And that's a question I'd like to pose to Innovate Carolina, is how to do that when you're just starting up and you don't know where it's going to go or how it's going to work. But not for today, obviously.
Yeah, I won't answer the long version of that, but the short answer is you can always ask folks to join for a specific period of time. And so you could ask, you could say that you're not sure where this project will go, but in the next like 4 to 6 weeks, here are the short-term goals that you're hoping to accomplish and to learn more for, and to ask them if they'd want to join you for that part, but not expect them to commit for the long haul. But I'm hearing others, and we'll touch upon this next week, or not next week, Wednesday, is when we talk about teams also, and I'm glad that someone earlier was talking about it expanded what they were thinking about who to include in teams, is to really think through which voices, and I think for the purposes of translating research into the real world, but also for the work that I do with my nonprofit, we have teenagers on our advisory boards, and that's really important to us, and they actually have decision-making power for certain things. But some of the non-traditional team members, like external stakeholders, like what role should they have on these teams, and what decisions should and can they have input on, and can we interact with them in a way that isn't tokenistic but is really meaningful? Okay, any other questions? I recognize we're over time. All right, so I like to start and end meetings as close to time as possible. So at this point, I will call it, but I will send out the email with more information later today. If you have any questions, my email is posted on this slide, and you've received communications from me. And I will look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday of this week. Hey, thanks all.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Liz.